God bless everybody today. It is April 25th of 2022. This is a Watchman's Report prophecy update for what's going on in the Middle East. I know there's a lot going on in the world around Ukraine. We've got Russia basically stalemated in Ukraine. And we had China taking the Solomon Islands, so I think that's something extremely important. But what I want to concentrate on today is what I believe is forming in front of our eyes at this very moment, and that's Daniel 8, verse 1 to 10 specifically. There's a translation that starts at Daniel 8, verse 20, which talks about the Kurds being the Medes, and so I believe that is extremely important, that the Kurds matter and that they're going to play a significant role in what's coming up in the next 6 months, 12 months. I believe in the next year they will be a major factor, and I'm going to try to explain why. This is going to be a fairly short video, so let's get into it. So I believe we had an extremely important weekend last weekend during Easter, and a major event that occurred on April 18th when Turkey launched a new offensive against the Kurds. And so we had the resurrection weekend of Good Friday on the 15th, and that ran through the weekend of the 17th. On Sunday we had Easter Sunday, and then that Monday of the 18th, and that's when Erdogan unleashed this new operation against the Kurds, and I think that's important. And that's right after Easter weekend, so I think that's important. We're starting into a new season. We've now had the spring feasts, and so we're going to move into this season, and I believe it's going to start to accelerate the process into Daniel 8, and I'll sort of go into some of the logistics of that. So on the 18th of April, right after Easter weekend, we had Turkey unleash a new offensive against the Kurdish rebels in Iraq. And I know in history Daniel 8 has occurred before, but I want to explain, and as I think I have many times in the last 4 to 5 years, and you can go watch a lot of those videos, that the past will reoccur in the future. And so we need to watch this transition from Daniel 8 to Daniel 12, and how we see basically a ram goat war that converts into an Ezekiel 38-39 war, which is still in the seals. Then we have a destruction of Gog, which moves us into the trumpet phase. Then we have a resurrection of an Antichrist on the 6th trumpet, once the pit opens on the 5th trumpet. And we see the Lord come back on the 7th trumpet, and we're resurrected just shortly after that, or raptured, not resurrected. So we need to understand the procession of events, and no one's talking about the Kurds. Everybody's talking about Russia or China or the markets or fuel or everything else. But the Kurds are probably the most important thing that we need to watch. In my world it is, in my consensus, I believe it's the most important thing. I believe it will be the next factor that affects the Middle East and moves us into this potential war against Israel. So it's important that we watch the Kurds. And like I said, I had that dream where the Kurds were being pulled down between Baghdad and Shush, and then when these two aligned, the Medo-Persians align, or the Kurds and Iran, we would see the destruction of both these nations through Turkey, or the goat. And so go look at the Daniel 8, 1 through 10 prophecy, because it's extremely important that you look at that prophecy. And then you can go to Daniel 8, 20, and it explains to you who these two nations are and why we should be watching them. And yes, this has happened in the past. We saw this happen in the past, and he tells us that he will show us in the past what will happen in the future, and so we need to watch these things. Now, I always keep updated real time with the Syrian Live Map site. And I specifically, you can target into the Middle East and then directly into the Kurds. As you can see here, you can actually click on the Kurds, track the Kurds, what's going on with them. If you click over these things, they actually tell you what they're about. You can also click on the side, or if you click on these, it will take you to a specific story. But we're watching a major bombardment of the whole northern border of Syria and Iraq. Just a few days ago, at the beginning of the week, last week, we were seeing this whole section being bombed over here. Now they're bombing everything over here. And if you go back to that dream that I had, that I talked about a year and a half ago, I had talked about how I was seeing them getting bombed on the east side, then they get bombed on the west side, and then over time this whole northern area would collapse, and they would be then pushed towards Baghdad. And Erbil's a massive city that we have to watch because it is the regional capital of the Kurdistan people, and that if this capital city would fall, that would force all these refugees down between here and Shush, Iran, and that the prophecy of Daniel, and this is not, you can read the prophecy, you just have to read the prophecy and understand who these players are. It doesn't, you don't need me to tell you this stuff. Just look at the prophecy, look at Daniel, what he's telling you, realize that God always tells us and shows us what happens in the past and what's going to come up in the future, and that we need to watch these things. And if you go through Daniel 8 through 12, you'll see there's a procession of events that's happening there. And so we need to watch why the Kurds or the Medes are so important. And once they get pulled down in here, I believe that Turkey will then come over and smash them. And that will geopolitically change everything from inflation, fuel prices, economic slowdown of massive proportions due to just all the strife on the planet between Russia, China, market melding. Markets are melding down at times, the volatility and everything in general. So it's important that we watch this. They've had some massive demonstrations along the Iranian border because Iran's important. That if you go into Iran, you'll realize that this whole western border of Iran is Kurdistan people. And so Iran's going to have a real problem when Turkey starts moving all these people down between Baghdad and Shush in this province of Elam, because they've got a massive political problem in the sense that the population is going to push back against the government because they're starting to see a lot of refugees start to move across the border into these Kurdistan regions along the western side, and that this whole thing's going to collapse down into this area. And once this happens, Turkey's going to come down and crush them. And Turkey is not going to allow Iran to have a bomb. Now, one of the things that's been holding off a lot of the talks, or Russia's been basically dealing with Iran and all these different areas over here in the nuclear deal, but that isn't going well, and they're requiring us to remove the Iranian guard off the terrorist list, and they're not going to do that. If they do that, because they want the oil so badly, and now we're working with governments like Iran and Venezuela in the ability to get fuel and oil to the population so we can drive the price down, then we're just working with evil players, and so that's just going to turn out bad regardless. And Iran's still going to get a bomb, and they're within weeks or so from getting a bomb. They were within weeks or so a month ago from getting a bomb from March. So we're going to see a real problem here as Turkey ramps up against the Kurds. And it's interesting that everybody's concerned about the Ukrainians, and I am too. I think what's going over there right now is evil, and what Putin's doing, and these people are putting up with horrific existence in just trying to survive and maintain in their country while another invading country is trying to take them over. The same thing is happening to the Kurds, and no one's talking about this. They're being pushed out of their regional areas. Turkey even made the comment that Iraq was helping them to do this. Now, Iraq came back later and said that that wasn't the case. But I also noticed that Iraq has been ramping up their attacks on the Kurdistan region, so I'm not sure that that is the case and that they are working together. Now, I've seen a lot of reports about how Russia's going to invade into the Middle East somehow now that they're locked into Ukraine, and that this is somehow going to spill over. And so Russia, or Rosh, is a factor here. And I keep telling you, if you go out and look at Rosh, you realize that that is the head or chief of the land of Magog or Gog, which is, Meshech, Tubal, that area, which is all in Turkey. It's all Asia Minor. It's all in Turkey. It's where the churches were found, where the letters were written in Revelation 2 and 3. And so you need to watch these things and realize that Russia's not going to be a major factor here. They're so inept in Ukraine and so bogged down, and Russia cannot not save face here. He's got to create a victory. So he's going to be entrenched in Ukraine for a long, long time. Okay? And so Russia's not going to have the ability. And Turkey just shut off the airspace. And so they have to go through Iran now, or some other way, to get to Syria or Iraq or anything in the Middle East. So Turkey has taken total control of the Middle East. He has Iran surrounded. He owns the Taliban in Afghanistan. He owns Azerbaijan and Armenia in the north. He has control of Syria and Iraq. He's also dealing with Turkestan and some of these other nations in the northeast. So Iran is surrounded. And if I've shown you the maps before, if you go from Azerbaijan, Armenia, through that sea, Tehran's 50 miles from the sea border. So, it's a real problem for them. They're going to be taken over quite easily. Turkey's going to have their armor there already, and they're going to take their massive air force and they're going to fly over, as the prophecy says, like a whirlwind. They'll destroy these people. They won't even have a chance. It won't even be it won't even be a fight. God just says that he goes over and smashes them, pummels them in the ground. So I'm going to go with what God says on that one, and that Turkey is going to smash these two nations. But, as I said, this is a past to future prophecy. And so we need to look at what happened in the past will occur in the future. And yes, over time we will see a little horn reappear as an Antichrist figure, because you'll see 10 nations. First of all, let's backtrack just a second. Daniel 8 occurs. Iran falls. The Medo-Persian Empire falls again. Turkey drives to Egypt, which is a problem because they have to go through Jordan and Israel to get there. They get stopped there. They leave a quarter of their army behind, a sixth of their army behind there. They get pulled up by the hook of the jaw and placed between the two seas, and they attack Israel. And by that time, I say the end of October, around the end of 23, you'll see 10 full nations besieging Jerusalem. But Turkey at this point is under complete control of this area. No one's paying attention and nobody cares, and they're being a humanitarian between Ukraine and the Russians, and they're trying to be a humanitarian between Russia and Israel, and how they're trying to deal with the nuclear situation in Iran. And so Turkey's been trying to portray themselves as a humanitarian group. They're taking people over the border, from some of these refugees and different things like that. So you have to give them credit for where the credit's due, but in general, Erdogan and the government of Turkey is a real problem, and it's usually not the peoples of the countries, it's the governments and the people that control the governments. One of the other things I think is extremely important, this happened on the 20th, and around that weekend of Easter, we had those clashes on the Temple Mount. There was a lot of disruption, and these factions are not getting along, and usually when we see disruptions on the Temple Mount, that tends to signal problems as we move into the future. You can go and check those stories out. I'm not going to get into exactly what happened. You need to look at these events, because anytime we affect the temple or God's seat, it matters to things. So just sort of keep an eye on these things and realize that all these things are happening in front of us. Things are starting to build up in Israel as well as the Middle East and in the world in general. Massive inflation's taking over. China's basically locked down, and so you're going to see global stagflation happening, because the China's controlling 20% of the GDP of the world, and so when they're locked down, the global engine, as some call it, shuts down. And so you're going to see massive shortages of all kinds of different things. Russia, Ukraine's a problem because they deal with a lot of fertilizer, wheat, sunflower oil, and different things like that. And so we're going to see shortages on a number of different effects. Actually, I believe Indonesia just limited their exports of palm oils and different things like that, because they know they're going to run into shortfalls. And so we're going to start to see a lot of different things happen to where people are going to hold their resources and not necessarily export them out, because they don't know if they're going to see shortfalls in their own economies and how that's going to affect them. And so that's going to affect their growth. And the governments are concerned about growth right now, and how inflation is going to impact us, as your rent's going up 20%, your food's going up by 10%, real core, inflation's probably over 10%, and you're watching the bond markets and everything melt down at this very moment. So God bless everybody. I wanted to go over some of the things that are happening in the Middle East. I believe they're going to affect us. I believe Daniel 8 is in the process of building at this very moment, and it's going to affect us tremendously as we move forward in the next 6 to 12 months. Find the open door, find Jesus. He's the only way to the Creator. He's the only way out of this mess. And so if you want to get out of this mess, you need to find the Son. He's the only way out. So God bless everybody, and have a great